I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was close to midnight when I ended up at her kitchen, though kitchen is generous. It's really just a small nook with a coffee machine that hums too loudly and a stack of mismatched mugs. I had promised myself I'd just grab the leftover cookies my friend had left behind, then go back to my apartment and scroll through unsent texts until I fell asleep. She was there, leaning against the counter, hair pulled back loosely, one hand tracing the rim of a mug she hadn't filled yet. The light from the fridge caught her profile, soft lines I hadn't noticed before, not in the daylight when everything else felt sharper. "Hey," she said, voice low, almost uncertain. Hey," I said, pausing. My hand rested on the cookie container, but I didn't open it. Something about the way she looked at me, the quiet tilt of her head, the way her eyes flicked to my hands and then back up, made me suddenly conscious of the crumbs on my fingers. "You still drink that awful instant coffee?" she asked, a hint of a smirk tugging at her lips. I nodded, laughing softly. Some habits die hard. Her smile lingered longer than I expected. For a moment, we didn't talk. I noticed how her fingers traced the edge of the counter, nails catching the faint kitchen light, a movement so ordinary it almost hurt to watch. I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for something I couldn't name. She poured the coffee anyway. Not for me, I'm sure of that. But I watched her pour, the slow tilt of the pot, the small splash that missed the mug. I wanted to reach out, maybe steady it, but my hand stayed where it was, hovering over cookies I didn't need. "You remember how I take it," I said finally. Half question, half hope that she'd remember. Her eyes flicked up, just a second, and that's all it took. "Cream, not too much sugar," she said, like it was something I should have expected her to know. Like it was a tiny proof that someone, somewhere, had been paying attention. The clock ticked too loudly. I noticed my knee bouncing. She shifted slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and I caught her glance out of the corner of my eye. There was something in the way she paused, fingers still against the counter, that made me forget to care about why I was even there. We spoke in small fragments after that. Nothing important. Half jokes, half observations about how quiet the neighborhood was at this hour. I laughed at one of her dry remarks about the laundry I'd abandoned in the shared washer months ago. She tilted her head, eyes softening, as if she found something comforting in my clumsy humor. I almost had noticed the pause before she handed me the mug of coffee. My fingers brushed hers for a second, long enough for a flicker of warmth to travel up my arm. I stepped back quickly, unsure if she had felt it, unsure if I had. "Thanks," I said, words too quiet. She just nodded, eyes lingering on mine a second longer than necessary. Then she disappeared into the hallway for a moment, came back with a folded note, and left it on the counter. I stared at it for longer than I should have, fingers hovering, and a small, inexplicable pulse ran through me. No idea why I was nervous. No idea why I wanted to tear it open right away or leave it there forever. When I finally glanced down, it was blank except for a single line, "Don't be late tomorrow." I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew something had shifted, something I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. I woke up the next afternoon with her note still on my mind. "Don't be late tomorrow." I wasn't sure what it meant, but it felt like a thread pulling me somewhere I wasn't supposed to go. By evening, I found myself back at her house. She answered the door before I could knock properly. Her hair was loose this time, falling over her shoulders, and she was wearing a faded cardigan I'd seen her wear on one of the few times I'd been here before. "Tea," she offered, voice casual, but I noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she carried the pot to the small table. "Sure," I said. My words sounded too loud in the quiet room. We sat across from each other, the kettle still warm between us. I stirred sugar into my cup without thinking, noticing how her gaze flicked to the pattern on the tablecloth, then back to me, as if she were measuring how much to say. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly, voice low, almost a whisper. "Miss what?" I said, heart picking up. "The life before all this," she said, gesturing vaguely. Her divorce, the quiet nights alone, the weight of raising a kid. Her eyes didn't meet mine for a beat. Then they did, careful, searching. I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I had imagined 100 scenarios where I could take away some of that loneliness, even for a moment. I wanted to say yes, I understand, but instead I just nodded. Yeah, I said finally. I get that. A pause stretched between us, filled only by the ticking clock and the faint hum of the fridge. I noticed my hand brushing the edge of the table, thumb rubbing against the wood grain. She didn't move, but her fingers twitched slightly near her mug. The risk hung in the air like a scent I couldn't name. She was my friend's mom, decades older, and yet the space between us felt smaller than it should have been. I imagined telling someone about this later, imagined the judgment, the questions, and it made my chest tighten. I used to read at this same table when I was your age, she said, and I realized she was letting me in, letting me see something ordinary about her, a sliver of her life before. I'd sit here for hours just thinking. I smiled quietly because I recognized the look, the one I'd catch myself in the mirror some nights, lost in thought, trying to hold on to something I couldn't name. We spoke less after that. Instead, we folded laundry together, a mundane act that somehow felt intimate. My hand lingered on a towel I handed her. She caught it, held it a moment longer than necessary, just a fraction of a second that seemed to stretch into something else. Then she laughed softly at something I said, and her eyes stayed on mine longer than the joke warranted. That single glance carried a weight that neither of us addressed, a silent acknowledgement of the line we were close to crossing. As I left later, I hesitated at the doorway. She stepped forward and lightly touched my arm. Not a hug, not even a handshake, but that small, deliberate contact sent a pulse through me I wasn't ready to name. I walked home thinking about it over and over. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The rain had started just as I stepped out of the subway, slow drops darkening the pavement. I didn't mean to come here. I told myself I wouldn't, but she was waiting on the bench across from the small park near her street, umbrella forgotten, shoulders hunched like the weather had found her before I did. "Hey," I said, voice softer than I expected. She looked up, eyes wide, like she'd been caught thinking too much. She shook her head, letting the rain hit her hair. "I didn't hear you," she murmured. We didn't move, just sat, listening to the patter on the leaves, the muffled city sounds around us. I noticed the small curve of her lip, the way her hand rested loosely in her lap, fingers twitching. "I saw him today," she said suddenly, almost too quietly to hear. I blinked, heart lurching. "Who?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Her gaze met mine, sharp for a second. "Your friend. He asked about you." A part of me wanted to laugh, deflect, but the tighter knot in my chest wouldn't let it. My hand is to reach out, but stayed tucked in my pocket. "You shouldn't care," I said, then immediately hated the words. They sounded bitter and small. "I don't know what I'm feeling," she admitted, and the honesty hung there exposed. "I know it's wrong, whatever this is." And yet, her voice trailed, and I could hear the catch in it, the weight of all the quiet nights, all the things she hadn't said. I shifted closer, careful not to bridge the space too much, careful of everything. My knee brushed hers, and I froze. She didn't pull away. "I keep imagining things I shouldn't," I said finally, voice low, almost a whisper to myself. "You, me, here, alone." She blinked slowly, lips parting. I think about that too," she confessed. Her hand twitched again, brushing the edge of her bag. I noticed the small scars along her wrist, faint lines I'd never paid attention to before, and for a moment, I felt the gravity of every choice waiting behind us. The rain picked up slightly, drumming louder on the bench, as if the world itself had stopped to listen. I wanted to say more, to let the words tumble out, but my throat felt locked. "You can't," I whispered almost to myself. "I know," she said. Her eyes softened, but the tension didn't leave. And yet, here we are. Silence settled over us. Not awkward, not forced, just a pause filled with what could happen and what shouldn't. I kept imagining leaning closer, bridging that impossible gap. My hand hovered, not touching, shaking slightly in the cold. She shifted, eyes lowering to the wet pavement, then back to me. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everything we'd almost admitted, everything held back, and the quiet panic of being so close to a line we weren't supposed to cross. I wanted to ask her, but the words froze somewhere between my chest and my tongue. Do you want this? And the rain fell harder, leaving it unspoken. The apartment felt different when I walked in that evening. Too quiet. Usually, she'd be moving around somewhere. Cups clinking, soft humming, the smell of something halfway edible wafting from the kitchen. Tonight, none of that. I left a text. Hey, are you around? No reply. I tried again an hour later. Nothing. By the next day, she was back at work. I imagined pretending nothing had changed. And maybe she was. When I finally saw her, she smiled, brief, polite, distant. Her usual teasing tone was gone. She didn't ask about my week, didn't comment on the book I'd been reading, didn't glance at my hands, or notice the way I fidgeted with my sleeve. I kept looking for the old signs, the tilt of her head, the pause in her words, the tiny brushes of contact. Nothing. It was like the apartment, like her, had contracted, leaving only an empty shell of what had been. I caught myself walking past her kitchen late one night, hoping to see her, and hesitated at the door, fingers curling around the frame. She wasn't there. I lingered, listening to the silence that seemed to mock me. A week later, I learned, by accident, that she'd run into her ex at a store. Not just any ex, but one she'd mentioned once in passing, decades ago, that I had somehow forgotten. Seeing him, she'd smiled the way I'd never seen her smile for me. Not wide, not warm, just something that reminded me that her life wasn't mine to touch, wasn't mine at all. I wanted to text her to ask, to clarify, but the words felt brittle on my phone. Did that mean anything? Too weak. I missed this, too bold. So I sent nothing. I imagined her sitting across from someone else, laughing in the same quiet way she'd laughed at me, maybe even reaching for a hand she didn't pull back. I imagined myself there, frozen, unable to move, unable to ask what she wanted, unable to hold the thing that had been slowly building between us. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about the small gestures, the flick of her hand over the edge of the counter, the way she'd let her gaze rest on me too long, the softness in her pause when she almost said what she shouldn't have. I caught myself walking past her street, staring at her window, imagining the silhouette of her back as she moved through her night. I didn't knock. I didn't text. I just watched. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. A chair remained empty in her kitchen, a mug left half full, a note unsent on my phone. All of it waiting for something neither of us could name, or maybe waiting for me to be brave enough to name it. And I stayed there, leaning against the wall outside, wondering if she even noticed that I'd ever been there at all. I found her in the kitchen again, same small nook where it had started. The light from the fridge spilled across the tile floor, making her hair look like it had been dusted with gold. I hesitated in the doorway, hands stuffed in my pockets, heart too loud in the silence. Hey, she said, not turning around, voice careful, almost guarded. Hey, I replied, the words sounding hollow even to me. We didn't sit right away. I leaned against the counter across from her, just far enough to let her space feel safe, just close enough to notice the small movements. Her fingers brushing crumbs from the counter, the slight tilt of her shoulders, the way she exhaled, soft and steady, like she'd been holding herself together all day. I didn't come before, I said, voice low, because I wasn't sure if I should, or if you even wanted me here. She turned then, slowly, eyes catching mine. I saw the pause, the careful consideration, like she was weighing whether to take a step forward or retreat. I wasn't sure either, she admitted. And that was it. That single, honest confession cracked open everything we'd been holding back. I felt the weight of all the weeks, all the moments we'd shared and lost, pressing down. I think I wanted to say something for a while, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. And maybe I shouldn't, but I can't keep pretending it's nothing. Her gaze softened, and she leaned against the counter a little, hands brushing over hers absent-mindedly. I noticed how she had a little tremor in her fingers, not from cold, not from fear, just from holding herself steady. Go on, she said quietly. I like you, more than I probably should, I confessed. My words felt heavy, almost too real. I know it's complicated. I know it's wrong in a lot of ways. But I can't stop thinking about you. Silence stretched between us. Not empty, not awkward, just tense, fragile. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, and I realized she had been carrying the same thing, just in reverse. I like you too, she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. And it scares me, but I don't want to lie about it anymore. We stayed like that for a long moment, neither moving, letting the words settle in the space between us. I wanted to bridge it, to do something, anything, but instead I just let my hand rest near hers on the counter, close enough to notice warmth but not pressing. She gave a small, almost shy smile, one that held all the fear and hope and guilt at once. Okay, she said softly, and a single word felt like a promise and a permission, all at the same time. I nodded, matching her small smile, feeling the tension in my chest loosen just slightly. It wasn't a resolution in the way anyone would notice, not dramatic, not perfect, but it was ours, real and quiet and entirely human. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like the air around us had stopped holding its breath. Weeks had passed. The apartment smelled faintly of tea and laundry, of rain that had leaked through the cracked window one morning and lingered in the corners. I came over at 8:47 a.m., like I always did now, and she was already at the counter pouring black coffee into the chipped mug I liked best. "Morning," I said softly, smiling at the way her hair caught the early light, the same way it had the first night I'd noticed her profile. "Morning," she replied, eyes flicking to me, a hint of amusement and recognition in the way she didn't need to ask why I was here. We moved around the kitchen like a quiet choreography, folding towels, stirring cups, brushing past each other occasionally, fingertips grazing the edges of the same plate. Nothing dramatic. No declarations. Just small, earned closeness. We still went to the bench near her streets sometimes. It was our quiet ritual, watching city life drift by, talking about the smallest things, what the barista had done wrong with the latte, which book we'd abandon next, whether the rain was supposed to last or not. I noticed her hand brush against mine once or twice, and it felt like the world had slowed just enough to hold us. There were moments of ordinary warmth. The way she remembered my order without being asked, the tiny smirk when I messed up the folding again, the shared joke about leaving crumbs on the counter. I realized these little gestures mattered more than anything dramatic ever could. Sometimes late at night, she'd leave a note folded neatly on the counter, usually a reminder about something mundane, like a missed trash pickup or a package that arrived for me by mistake. But I'd read them differently now, each line carrying the weight of what we'd quietly survived. One evening, the rain came back, slow and steady, and we sat on the bench together, hooded jackets brushing. She glanced at me, and I didn't need words to understand her thought. The bench, the rain, the pause between the raindrops, everything had led us here. I caught myself smiling at the ordinary rhythm of it all. The coffee at 8:47, the folded towels, the small, deliberate touches that said what words never could. Nothing perfect, nothing cinematic, just this right here quietly ours. When I left that night, she followed me to the door. We stood there, shoulders almost touching, rain dripping from our sleeves. "See you tomorrow?" I asked. She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips, and nodded. "Okay," she said. And that was enough. Walking home, I thought about the first night I'd seen her in the kitchen, the note, the small tremor in her hand, the way the rain had caught us once before. Life hadn't given us a grand moment, no fireworks, no dramatic confessions. Just the quiet accumulation of time, small gestures, and shared silences that somehow meant everything. I realized then that love didn't always need a declaration. Sometimes it was just a cup of black coffee at 8:47, a hand brushing yours while folding towels, a smile that said, without words, "We're here. We're together." And somehow that's enough. And I walked home knowing that this quiet, earned rhythm was exactly what we had both been waiting for.